They say silence is golden, but sometimes it is the quiet before a storm. It is the deep, indrawn breath of a universe holding its judgment, waiting for the precise moment to unleash a justice as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. In the grand ballroom of a glittering New York hotel, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of self-congratulation. On stage, bathed in a warm spotlight, was Marcus Thorne, a man at the peak of his world, accepting an award for philanthropy. His voice, smooth and confident, echoed through the chamber, speaking of integrity, of community, of the values that built his success. And in the audience, at the center table, sat his wife, Amelia Thorne, a portrait of quiet elegance. Her smile was perfect, a gentle curve she had practiced in the mirror 1,000 times, a beautiful mask for the hollow space that had been growing inside her for years. Her silk gown felt less like a dress and more like a delicate shell, protecting a woman who was slowly becoming invisible, even to herself. As Marcus spoke about the importance of family, her eyes drifted away from the stage. And that's when she saw her, Chloe, her best friend, standing in the soft shadows near a marble pillar, half hidden from the crowd. Chloe wasn't looking at the stage with the polite admiration of the other guests. Her gaze was fixed on Marcus, an intense, possessive look that was both a caress and a claim. And then it happened. Marcus, in the middle of a sentence about loyalty, flickered his eyes from the teleprompter just for a second and found Chloe in the shadows. A small, almost imperceptible smirk touched his lips. It was a look that passed between them in an instant, but it contained a universe of shared secrets. It was not a glance, it was a conversation. In that silent exchange, Amelia saw everything. The late nights at the office, the sudden business trips, the scent of a foreign perfume clinging faintly to his collar. The world did not shatter with a loud explosion. It simply dissolved. The applause for her husband became a dull roar. The glittering chandeliers blurred into meaningless streaks of light. Her smile froze on her face, a brittle porcelain thing. There were no tears. There was no sudden gasp. There was only a profound, chilling stillness that settled deep within her soul. The woman who had existed a moment ago, the trusting wife, the hopeful partner, died in that chair. And in her place, something else was born. Something cold, something patient, and something terrifyingly calm. It was the calm of a battlefield after the war is lost, just before the real fight for survival begins. To understand the depth of the chasm that opened in Amelia's life that night, you must first understand the masterpiece of illusion they had built together. Their life was not lived, it was curated, a breathtaking exhibition of success and happiness housed in a sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a living painting, a constant reminder of the world they had conquered. Every piece of furniture, every work of art, every silver candlestick on the mahogany dining table was chosen not just for its beauty, but for the story. It told a story of old money, impeccable taste, and effortless power. This was the world of the Thornes, and at its center was Marcus. Marcus was not merely a man. He was an institution, the golden heir to a financial dynasty, blessed with a jawline that could cut glass and a charisma that could charm governments. He moved through the world with an unshakable confidence that came from never having been told no. To the outside world, he adored Amelia. He would praise her elegance at dinner parties, toast her as his anchor in interviews, and buy her extravagant jewelry that she never asked for. But in the quiet moments, in the sterile perfection of their home, his adoration revealed itself as ownership. He saw Amelia not as a partner, but as his most prized acquisition, the final, perfect piece to complete his collection. She was the beautiful, intelligent, well-bred wife who made him look good, who ran his home with silent efficiency, and who never, ever overshadowed him. And then there was Eleanor Thorne, the matriarch, the architect of Marcus's universe, and the silent warden of Amelia's gilded cage. Eleanor's cruelty was an art form. It was never loud or vulgar. It was delivered in the delicate space between words, in a well-timed sigh, or a compliment that felt like a slap. She would glide into the penthouse, her pearls clicking softly, and survey Amelia's efforts with the critical eye of a museum curator. "Oh, darling," she would say, adjusting a flower arrangement Amelia had spent an hour perfecting. "A lovely attempt. Next time, let me send my florist over. He has a better understanding of these things." She spoke of Amelia's decision to leave her career as a noble sacrifice, yet the words were always laced with a subtle poison, implying that Amelia simply wasn't strong enough to handle the pressures of both a career and a man like Marcus. Eleanor had raised her son to believe he was the sun, and everyone else, especially his wife, was a minor planet destined to orbit him. She saw Amelia not as a daughter-in-law, but as a high-level employee, hired to manage her son's domestic life, an employee who was, in her opinion, perpetually failing to meet expectations. Together, Marcus and Eleanor formed an impenetrable alliance, a two-person board of directors for a corporation called The Perfect Life, and Amelia was just a line item in the budget. What they consistently, fatally, underestimated was the woman Amelia had been before she became Amelia Thorne. She was not some naive girl swept off her feet. Amelia Hayes had graduated top of her class from Wharton, a brilliant financial analyst with a mind that saw patterns in market chaos that others missed. She was recruited by the most aggressive firms on Wall Street, known for her calm under pressure and her almost psychic ability to predict a stock's movement. She was a hunter, sharp and focused. She met Marcus at a charity auction, and he was captivated by her intellect as much as her beauty. He pursued her relentlessly, not with cheap romance, but with a calculated campaign, selling her on a vision of a shared future. He called their marriage the greatest merger of their lives. And Amelia, who had spent her 20s in boardrooms and trading floors, found herself yearning for a different kind of life. A home, a family, a partnership built on love, not just profit margins. Under the constant, persuasive pressure from Marcus and the cool, insistent guidance of Eleanor, she agreed to step back from her career. Just for a few years, Marcus had promised, until the children come. The children never came, and the years stretched on. Amelia tried to stay sharp, managing the family's vast and complex personal investments, tripling their private wealth through her astute strategies. Marcus found it amusing. "Look at you playing with your little hobby," he'd say with a condescending pat on her head before turning to his friends to complain about a multi-million-dollar corporate deal. He never saw that her hobby required more skill and foresight than his entire team of corporate analysts possessed. He never understood that the mind that had once terrified Wall Street was now being used to choose canapés for his dinner parties and rebalance his stock portfolio. He simply saw what he wanted to see: a beautiful, placid wife, a perfect hostess, a silent partner. Their life was a lie, but it was a comfortable, luxurious lie. And for a long time, Amelia had been willing to live within it, telling herself that this was the price of peace, the cost of love. She didn't realize she wasn't paying with money, or time, or ambition. She was paying with her soul. And that night at the gala, as she watched the silent, treacherous exchange between her husband and her best friend, she finally understood the truth. The merger was a hostile takeover. Her position had been liquidated, and the beautiful penthouse overlooking the park was not a home. It was a cage, and its door had just been unlocked. Clarity is a cruel gift. Once you have it, you can never go back to the comfortable fog of ignorance. Looking back from the cold, hard certainty of that gala night, Amelia could see the preceding months with painful precision. The truth hadn't arrived in a sudden, violent ambush. It had been a slow, creeping infiltration, a series of small, almost insignificant cracks appearing in the flawless facade of their life. She had noticed them, of course, but she had diligently, desperately, plastered over each one, telling herself they were nothing, just the normal settling of a house built on a strong foundation. The first crack was a line item on a credit card statement. Tucked between charges for groceries from Dean and DeLuca and a donation to the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a purchase from Cartier. It was for a 5-figure sum, for a delicate diamond tennis bracelet she had never seen. When she'd asked Marcus about it, he barely looked up from his tablet. "Corporate gift, darling," he'd said, his voice a smooth, dismissive balm. "For the wife of that Japanese investor I told you about, it's just the cost of doing business." And Amelia, who had built a career on scrutinizing financial data for the slightest inconsistency, simply nodded. She wanted to believe him. Believing him was easier than confronting the cold, logical question that her own mind presented. Why would a Japanese investor's wife want a bracelet sized perfectly for her best friend's wrist? More cracks appeared, subtle financial fissures. Receipts for dinners at intimate, candlelit restaurants she'd never been to, filed under client entertainment. Weekend hotel bills from the Hamptons on weekends he was supposedly on a solo golf trip to clear his head. Each time, his explanations were plausible, effortless, and each time, she chose to accept them. Then came the change in the atmosphere of their home, a shift in the very air she breathed. Marcus began working later, his nights stretching into the murky hours of the early morning. He'd slip into bed, careful not to wake her, but she was always awake, lying perfectly still, listening. He started smelling different. The familiar, clean scent of his cologne and the crisp scent of success were replaced by something else. One night, as he leaned in to give her a perfunctory kiss on the forehead, she caught it distinctly. It was a faint ghost of a fragrance, floral and expensive. It was Chanel No. 5, Chloe's signature scent. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. "You smell like Chloe's perfume," she said, her voice small. Marcus pulled back, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes before it was replaced by amusement. "Don't be ridiculous, Amelia. I shared a cab with half the marketing department. Someone must have been wearing it." He made her feel foolish, her observation reduced to a petty, baseless accusation. His phone, once a casual object left on the nightstand or the kitchen counter, became an extension of his body. It was always in his pocket, or placed screen down on a table, a dark, silent sentinel guarding its secrets. A passcode was added. When she asked why, he'd laughed it off. New company security protocol. They're paranoid about corporate espionage. He was building walls around himself, brick by digital brick, and she was on the outside. Chloe, the architect of so much of this, played her own part with chilling perfection. Their friendship, once a source of genuine comfort for Amelia, became a performance. Chloe grew more attentive, almost suffocatingly so. There were surprise gifts, incessant invitations for lunch, gushing compliments on Amelia's outfits, her home, her grace. It was the behavior of someone overcompensating, a pantomime of affection designed to mask a terrible guilt. Over salads at their favorite cafe, Chloe would expertly steer the conversation. "Marcus seems so stressed lately," she'd say with a concerned frown. "He's working so hard for you, for your future. You're so lucky to have a man that dedicated." She was planting a narrative, framing his absence and secrecy not as betrayal, but as sacrifice. She was making Amelia a co-conspirator in her own deception, turning her into a gatekeeper who would feel guilty for questioning her husband's noble efforts. And Amelia, starved for reassurance, clung to Chloe's words, letting them soothe the very suspicions Chloe herself was causing. The final layer of defense was, as always, Eleanor. During one of their stiff, formal weekly teas, Amelia dared to voice a sliver of her anxiety. "Marcus has been so distant lately," she confessed, staring into her teacup. "I worry we're drifting apart." Eleanor placed her cup down with a soft, deliberate click. "Amelia," she said, her voice devoid of warmth, "a man of Marcus's stature is not like other men. He operates in a world you no longer understand. His distance, as you call it, is focus. The last thing he needs when he comes home is to be burdened by a wife's insecurities. Your purpose is to be his peace, his quiet harbor. I suggest you focus on that and be grateful for the life his focus provides for you." The admonishment was clear. Her feelings were irrelevant. Her intuition was a nuisance. Her role was to be beautiful, silent, and supportive. And so, Marcus was free to operate, protected by a fortress of lies, with his mother as the warden and his mistress as the friendly guard at the gate. Any time Amelia's intuition flared, any time she got close to asking a real, penetrating question, Marcus would deploy the final, devastating weapon, he would make it her fault. "You seem so anxious lately, honey. Is everything okay?" he would ask, his face a mask of loving concern. "After all the pressure I'm under, I come home and have to deal with this paranoia. It's exhausting." He was a master of gaslighting, expertly turning her perception of the truth into a symptom of her own emotional instability. She began to doubt herself, to question the evidence of her own senses, the scent of perfume, the guarded phone, the strange receipts. Perhaps they were all just creations of an insecure mind, the phantom pains of a career she had abandoned. She chose to live in the fog. She chose to believe the beautiful lie because the truth threatened to shatter not just her marriage, but her very sense of self. In the days leading up to the gala, she had achieved a kind of fragile peace, a state of willful blindness. She told herself she was happy. She told herself she was loved. She stood upon the meticulously constructed stage of her life, smiling for the audience, refusing to acknowledge the deep, groaning cracks spreading beneath her feet, just moments before the entire structure was about to collapse. The walk from her chair to the grand, arched doorway of the ballroom was the longest journey of Amelia's life. Each step was a battle between the screaming chaos in her mind and the serene composure demanded by her body. She was a ghost gliding through a party, her polite smile a fixed porcelain mask. She nodded at acquaintances, murmured thank you to those congratulating her on Marcus's award, and felt the pressure of hundreds of eyes on her back. They saw the wife of the man of the hour, a perfect accessory to a perfect evening. They had no idea they were watching a woman walk away from the smoldering wreckage of her own life. She found a quiet corridor, away from the music and the laughter, paneled in dark wood and lined with oil paintings of forgotten patriarchs. She leaned against the cool wall, closing her eyes, trying to breathe, trying to convince herself that the silent, venomous exchange she had witnessed was a figment of her imagination, a hallucination brought on by stress or jealousy. She told herself she was wrong, that she was paranoid, that she was destroying the most precious thing in her life with her own insecurities. And in that moment of desperate self-deception, she heard them. Their voices, seeping from a conference room door that was slightly ajar, were as clear and sharp as the chime of a crystal glass. It was Marcus, and it was Chloe. "You were brilliant up there," Chloe's voice purred, laced with an intoxicating mix of admiration and intimacy. "The part about family and loyalty?" I almost burst out laughing. Marcus chuckled, a low, arrogant sound that sent a shard of ice through Amelia's veins. "It's what they want to hear. You have to sell the brand. And right now, the brand is a happily married philanthropist." There was a soft clinking of glasses. "To the brand," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And to the brand's chief financial officer. Did you see her face? Amelia, sitting there, looking up at you like you're a god. So proud, so beautifully, perfectly clueless." The cruelty of it, the casual, dismissive mockery, struck Amelia with the force of a physical blow. She pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp, her entire body trembling. This was worse than an affair. An affair was a crime of passion. This was a sport, and she was the joke. "That cluelessness is our greatest asset," Marcus replied, his tone shifting from amusement to business. "I've got the final documents from the lawyers. The new estate plan. It's perfect. It reallocates the capital from the Hayes Trust into a new series of investment vehicles." Amelia's blood ran cold. The Hayes Trust was the inheritance her father had left her, a carefully constructed portfolio designed to protect her for the rest of her life. It was her safety net, her independence. "Are you sure she'll sign it?" Chloe asked, a sliver of practical concern in her voice. "Won't she want her own lawyer to look it over?" "She's not stupid, Marcus." Marcus let out a short, derisive laugh that would haunt Amelia's nightmares for years to come. "Stupid? Number? She's smart. But her intelligence is theoretical. In the real world, she's a child. And more importantly, she's in love with me. She trusts me. She believes that love is about faith, not fine print. I'll tell her it's to minimize our tax liability, that it's for our future. I'll slide the papers in front of her over breakfast, next to her orange juice, and she'll sign without reading the second page. By the time she ever thought to question it, The assets would be liquidated and moved. That money won't be her safety net anymore. It will be our launch pad. The air in the hallway grew thin, impossible to breathe. In that moment, the last vestiges of the woman Amelia had been the loving wife, the forgiving friend, the hopeful partner crumbled to dust. The pain was so immense, so absolute, that it transcended tears. It was a supernova of betrayal that burned away all the softness within her, leaving behind something diamond-hard and brutally clear. This was not a betrayal of the heart. This was an execution. They had assessed her, judged her, and sentenced her to obsolescence. They saw her as a walking bank account, a signature on a dotted line, a fool to be placated and then discarded. The analytical mind that she had suppressed for so long, the mind that could see patterns in chaos and calculate risk in an instant, roared back to life. It was like a dormant supercomputer booting up, its processors cold and lethally efficient. She was no longer a wife seeing her husband. She was an analyst seeing an opponent. The objective was no longer to mend a broken heart. It was to mitigate a catastrophic threat. She backed away from the door, her movements now silent and deliberate. There were no stumbling steps, no frantic retreat. It was a strategic withdrawal. She walked back down the long corridor, her reflection in the polished marble showing a woman she now recognized. The gentle smile was gone from her eyes, replaced by the flat, unreadable calm of a predator. She re-entered the ballroom. The light and noise no longer felt suffocating. They were simply data points in a new environment. Marcus was back at their table, surrounded by admirers, laughing, soaking in the adulation. He was magnificent in his deception. He looked up as she approached, his face breaking into a warm, loving smile. "There you are," he said, reaching for her hand. "I was wondering where you went." Amelia let him take her hand, her own skin feeling like a stranger's. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not the man she had loved, but a hostile entity, a competitor who had just revealed his entire strategy. She leaned in and kissed his cheek. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," she whispered. Then she sat down, picked up her champagne flute, and raised it high, her eyes locking with his over the rim of the glass. "To my husband," she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing out for those nearby to hear. "To the man who always gets what he deserves." He beamed, thinking it a compliment. He had no idea it was a promise. The war had begun, and he had just given her the entire battle plan. The limousine ride home from the gala was a masterclass in silent warfare. Marcus, glowing with triumph and champagne, spoke animatedly about the people he'd met, the deals he'd hinted at, the future he was building. He was the star of his own movie, and he assumed Amelia was, as always, his most devoted audience. She sat beside him, not hearing a word. The ambient noise of his voice was just a soundtrack to the cold, frantic calculations running through her mind. She nodded, she smiled, she even squeezed his hand when he paused for effect. Her touch must have felt normal to him. He had no idea he was holding the hand of a woman who was mentally inventorying every asset, every password, and every lie that constituted their shared existence. He saw a loving wife. She saw a target environment rich with actionable intelligence. That night, he fell into bed and was asleep in minutes, a deep, arrogant sleep of a man who believes he has won at everything. Amelia lay beside him, her eyes wide open in the darkness, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. She did not feel anger. She did not feel sadness. She felt a profound, exhilarating focus. The grief had been a flash flood, and now that the waters had receded, the landscape of her new reality was stark and clear. When she was certain he was unconscious, she slipped out of bed. Her movements were fluid and silent. In his home office, bathed in the blue glow of the city outside, she sat down at his computer. He had always been careless, confident in the belief that she had no interest in his complex world. His password, laughably, was a combination of his college nickname and the year he won his first major deal. She was in within seconds. For the next 3 hours, Amelia was not a wife. She was the analyst she used to be. She moved through his digital life with a speed and precision that would have terrified him. She wasn't looking for love letters from Chloe. That was amateur hour. She was looking for the architecture of his power. She downloaded everything: bank statements, offshore account details from the Cayman Islands he thought were untraceable, partnership agreements, secret ledgers, contact lists, and the full, unredacted proposal for the restructuring of the Hayes Trust. She copied it all onto a tiny, encrypted hard drive, a digital ghost of the man he thought he was. The next morning, she kissed him goodbye as he left for work. "I'm so proud of you," she said, and the lie tasted like iron in her mouth. An hour later, she was not in a therapist's office or a cafe crying with a friend. She was in a sterile, soundproofed conference room downtown, sitting across from a man named Simon Reed. Reed was not a divorce lawyer. He was a corporate litigator, a shark known for dismantling companies, a man she remembered from her Wall Street days as being both brilliant and utterly merciless. Beside him sat a forensic accountant she had hired, a woman who could find a single misplaced dollar in a mountain of code. Amelia did not cry. She did not speak of betrayal or broken hearts. She laid out the situation as if she were a CEO reporting a security breach. "There has been a conspiracy to illegally seize control of a primary asset, the Hayes Trust," she began, her voice even. She pushed the hard drive across the table. "This contains all the relevant intelligence. My objective is twofold. First, asset protection. I want my inheritance shielded, ironclad, and moved beyond his reach immediately. Second, a silent extraction. I want to disappear from this partnership with my capital intact, leaving him with no legal recourse or ability to find me." Simon Reed, who was accustomed to weeping spouses and emotional tirades, simply stared at her, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. He had come expecting a domestic dispute. He had found a corporate raid. For the next week, Amelia lived a double life with breathtaking skill. By day, she was on conference calls with Simon and his team, executing a series of complex legal and financial maneuvers. They moved with blinding speed. The Hayes Trust was dissolved, and its assets poured into a newly created, anonymous Delaware corporation, with a series of offshore holding companies as a firewall. She used Marcus's own talking points, informing the very surprised family trustees that she was enacting a new, aggressive tax shelter strategy that Marcus himself had developed, and they, impressed by her sudden financial acumen, signed off on it. She flagged their shared properties with legal notices that would prevent their sale and methodically withdrew her half of the liquid funds from every joint account, placing the money into new accounts under her maiden name. By night, she was the perfect, doting wife. She made his favorite meal, listened to his complaints about the market, and even feigned a headache to avoid his touch in bed. The performance was flawless because it was no longer fueled by love, but by a cold, burning purpose. One evening, he brought up the estate plan she had overheard him discussing. "Darling," he began, swirling his wine, "I've had the lawyers draw up some new documents for us. It's a bit dry, but it's a brilliant way to protect our future." Amelia looked up from her book and gave him a soft, trusting smile. "Of course, Marcus. Whenever you're ready. You know I trust you to handle these things." The look of smug satisfaction on his face was her reward. He was walking into the snare, convinced it was his own brilliant idea. The following Tuesday, he packed an overnight bag for a business trip to Chicago. She knew he was flying to Miami to meet Chloe. She helped him choose a tie. She kissed him goodbye at the door. "Be safe," she said. The moment the elevator doors closed, she began the final phase. There was no large moving truck, just a discreet black van with two men she paid in cash. They didn't take the art or the furniture. They took her clothes, her books, her personal files, the few pieces of jewelry her mother had left her, and the small box of memories from a life before Marcus Thorne. She was not moving. She was erasing herself. When they were done, the penthouse looked almost untouched, yet its soul had been ripped out. Finally, she walked to the vast marble island in the kitchen. She took a single sheet of her expensive cream-colored stationery, the stationery Marcus had insisted they buy. She uncapped a pen and wrote 2 sentences. There was no anger, no sorrow, no recrimination in the clean, elegant script. It was a statement of fact. She then took off her 8-carat diamond wedding ring, the symbol of their merger, and placed it on top of the folded note. It was the only thing of his she was returning. The note simply said, "I know everything. Don't look for me." The flight from New York to Austin was a journey across more than just geography. As the familiar, jagged skyline of Manhattan dissolved into the clouds, Amelia felt a profound sense of severance, as if a thick, heavy rope connecting her to a past life had finally been cut. Midway through the flight, she took out her old phone, removed the SIM card, and snapped the small piece of plastic in half, dropping the pieces into an air sickness bag. She then performed a factory reset, wiping every photo, every message, every digital ghost of her marriage. The woman who landed in the sprawling, sun-drenched landscape of Texas was not Amelia Thorne. Mrs. Thorne had ceased to exist somewhere over the Mississippi River. The woman who stepped into the dry Texas heat was Amelia Hayes. Her own name felt strange and wonderful on her tongue, a forgotten relic that she was now polishing back to life. She didn't seek out luxury. Her first home was a minimalist apartment in a new development, with stark white walls and a view of the burgeoning city, not a park. The emptiness was deliberate. It was a blank canvas. For the first few weeks, the silence was a physical presence. In New York, her life had been filled with the noise of social obligations, of managing a household, of catering to the needs of Marcus and Eleanor. Here, there was only the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic. There were moments, late at night, when the phantom limb of her old life would ache, the sting of betrayal a fresh, sharp pain. But she did not allow grief to take root. She treated it like a fever, something to be endured, sweated out, and overcome. The pain was not her enemy, it was her fuel. Her days were not spent in quiet reflection, but in voracious study. She re-immersed herself in the world she had left behind, devouring market reports, tech journals, and venture capital news. She was a dormant predator reawakening its senses, and her hunting ground was now the explosive tech scene of Austin. Her capital, the inheritance her father had left her and that Marcus had tried to steal, was not a comfort blanket. It was an arsenal. Through the Wharton Alumni Network, a resource she had ignored for years, she found a name she vaguely recognized: Ben Carter. Ben had been a programming prodigy in college, a quiet genius who spoke more fluently in code than in English. His startup, a tiny, struggling company called Axiom Analytics, was rumored to have developed a predictive data analysis algorithm of unparalleled power, but was hemorrhaging cash and perpetually on the verge of collapse. Amelia saw an opportunity. She arranged a meeting at a nondescript coffee shop. Ben arrived looking exactly as she remembered him, just a decade older and 1,000 times more tired. He was gaunt, stressed, and spoke about his company with the desperate passion of a man watching his life's work sink into the ocean. He thought he was meeting a potential angel investor, someone who might give him $50,000 to keep the lights on for another month. He pitched his algorithm, his eyes lighting up as he explained the complex beauty of his creation. Amelia listened patiently, her face unreadable. When he was finished, she didn't offer praise or sympathy. Instead, she began to dissect his business with the calm precision of a surgeon. "Your algorithm is revolutionary, Ben," she said, her voice even, "but your business model is a disaster. You're targeting the wrong markets, your burn rate is unsustainable, and you have no strategy for monetization beyond a vague hope of being acquired." Ben stared at her, deflated and shocked by her brutal honesty. "I know," he mumbled. "I'm a coder, not a suit." "I am a suit," Amelia stated, leaning forward. The air between them crackled. "I'm not going to give you $50,000, Ben. I'm going to give you $10 million. That will be your operating budget for the next 2 years. In exchange, I'm taking a 60% controlling interest in the company, and I'm appointing myself CEO. You will be the Chief Technology Officer. You will focus on making the code perfect. I will handle everything else. I will make us all very, very rich." Ben was speechless. He was looking for a life raft, and she had just sailed a battleship into the harbor. He looked into her eyes and saw no hint of doubt, no room for negotiation. He saw a commander. He agreed on the spot. The next Monday, Amelia walked into the chaotic, cramped offices of Axiom Analytics. The place smelled of stale pizza and sleep deprivation. A handful of brilliant, socially awkward programmers, none of them over the age of 25, looked up from their screens, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and deep suspicion. To them, she was an outsider, a finance person from New York who couldn't possibly understand their world. She didn't give a speech about vision or teamwork. She convened a meeting in their small, cluttered conference room, and for the next 4 hours, she put on a clinic. She stood at the whiteboard, her marker flying, deconstructing their entire reality and rebuilding it into something lean, aggressive, and profitable. "You've been trying to sell this to social media companies," she said, drawing a thick red line through their primary target market. "The profit margins are razor thin, and the sales cycle is years long. It's a waste of time." She then drew a new box on the other side of the board. "Our new target is Wall Street. Hedge funds, investment banks, risk assessment firms. They are desperate for an edge, and they will pay millions for an algorithm that can predict market fluctuations with even a 1% greater accuracy. We're not selling a tool for them to sell more ads. We are selling them the future." The team was silent, stunned. They had been so focused on the elegance of their technology that they had never considered its most brutal and lucrative application. She was taking their beautiful academic creation and turning it into a weapon. She would use the language and the landscape of the world that had discarded her, the world of high finance, to build her new empire. The weeks that followed were a blur of relentless work. Amelia was the first to arrive and the last to leave. The pain of her past was sublimated, transformed into energy, and poured into spreadsheets, legal documents, and strategic plans. She rebuilt the company from the ground up, instilling a culture of discipline and accountability. The skeptical young team, seeing her unmatched work ethic and undeniable brilliance, slowly began to see her not as a suit, but as their leader. Late one night, months later, she stood alone in her new, larger office, looking out at the glittering lights of the Austin skyline. She was tired, but it was a clean, satisfying exhaustion, the ache of a muscle well used. She caught her reflection in the dark glass of the window. The woman looking back was not the gentle, smiling Mrs. Thorne. This woman's eyes were sharp, her jaw was set, and she was alone. But she was not lonely. She was in command. The phoenix hadn't just been reborn from the ashes. It was building an empire on top of them. The first official act of Amelia Hayes as CEO was to rename the company. Axiom Analytics was a name born of academic hope. It was quiet, unassuming. Amelia needed a name that was a statement, a declaration of intent. In a company-wide meeting, standing before her small team, she unveiled the new logo. Against a stark black background, a stylized, geometric bird with wings of fire rose from the bottom of the screen. Beneath it, in clean, sharp lettering, were 2 words: Phoenix Analytics. It was a promise to the market and a silent, personal vow. From the ashes of a former life, something new and powerful was about to take flight. Her strategy was a masterstroke of integration, bridging 2 worlds that rarely understood each other. Ben and his team of coders were the heart of the company, the engine room that refined their revolutionary algorithm. Amelia was the mind, the strategist who packaged their raw genius into something the cutthroat world of finance would not only understand, but covet. She was the perfect translator between the language of code and the language of greed. Together, they created their flagship product suite, a predictive analytics platform they named Oracle. It was a sleek, powerful tool that could be customized to analyze market volatility, assess portfolio risk, and identify investment opportunities with a level of accuracy that bordered on clairvoyant. But a brilliant product was useless without a foothold in the market. Amelia knew they couldn't start small. To be taken seriously, they needed to conquer the biggest lion in the jungle. She targeted a notoriously aggressive, alpha-driven hedge fund in New York called Scion Capital, run by a man who was famous for verbally eviscerating bad pitches. Securing the meeting alone was a feat, a testament to Amelia's relentless persistence. She didn't send a sales team. She went herself. She walked into the Scion Capital boardroom alone. The room was a sterile expanse of glass and steel, filled with 10 men in expensive suits who all wore the same predatory, skeptical smirk. They looked at her as if she were a curiosity, a woman from a no-name tech startup in Texas, daring to waste their time. They expected a nervous presentation filled with technical jargon. Amelia gave them a bloodbath. She began not with an introduction, but with a question. "On the 4th of March last year," she said, her voice calm and clear, her eyes sweeping across the room, "your fund lost an estimated $900 million on the unexpected collapse of the Asian tech market. Is that correct?" A stunned silence fell over the room. That number was not public knowledge. The CEO of the fund narrowed his eyes. "Our positions are confidential." Amelia simply nodded to Ben, who was running the presentation remotely from Austin. A chart flooded the massive screen behind her. It showed the market's trajectory on that fateful day. "This is what happened," she said. Then, with a click, a second, glowing line appeared on the chart, preempting the crash with a massive sell-off indicator 2 days before it happened. "And this," she added, her voice dropping slightly, "is what Oracle would have told you was going to happen. This glowing line isn't a loss. It's the single most profitable short-selling opportunity of the last fiscal year. A $900 million loss becomes a $2 billion gain." For the next hour, she systematically took them through every major market event of the past 2 years, demonstrating with cold, hard data how her software would have not only protected them from losses, but generated astronomical profits. She spoke their language: alpha, arbitrage, quantitative easing, black swan events. When they tried to trip her up with technical questions, she answered with a depth of knowledge that left them speechless. She wasn't selling them software. She was selling them omniscience. She left the meeting without a signed contract, but she knew she had won. 2 days later, Scion Capital signed an 8-figure, multi-year exclusive deal. The success at Scion Capital was a detonator. In the insular, gossip-fueled world of Wall Street, news of the Scion miracle spread like wildfire. The fund's profits soared to historic levels, and their traders spoke in hushed, reverent tones about a new secret weapon from Austin. Suddenly, Phoenix Analytics was the most talked-about fintech company on the planet. Calls flooded in from every major investment bank and hedge fund in the world, all of them begging for a demonstration. And at the center of this whirlwind was a deliberate and profound mystery. Amelia refused all interviews. She turned down magazine covers. No photos of her were ever released. She conducted all high-level business through secure video calls or, on rare occasions, in person, but always with strict, non-disclosure agreements. She became a legend, a ghost in the machine. On trading floors in New York and London, they called her A. Hayes, the enigmatic genius who had cracked the market code. This anonymity was her shield and her sword. It amplified her power, creating a mystique that made her product even more desirable. And more importantly, it kept her completely off the radar of Marcus Thorne and his circle, who would never dream of connecting this new, faceless titan of fintech with the quiet, docile wife he had so carelessly discarded. The company exploded. They moved from their cramped office into a sleek, minimalist headquarters that occupied 3 floors of a new Austin skyscraper. They poached the brightest minds from Silicon Valley and Wall Street, offering salaries and challenges their competitors couldn't match. Ben, now a multi-millionaire, thrived as CTO, free to innovate without the crushing weight of business decisions. His loyalty to Amelia was absolute. He had been the creator, but she had been the visionary. She was the one who saw the path to an empire where he had only seen a dead end. Amelia's transformation was now complete. Her life was the company. She worked with a singular, consuming focus that left room for nothing else. She wasn't healing, she was building. Her pain hadn't vanished. It had been transmuted, forged in the crucible of her ambition into something else entirely. Power. The soft-spoken woman who once agonized over floral arrangements now made multi-million-dollar decisions without a flicker of emotion. She was respected, she was admired, and by many, she was feared. And as she stood in her corner office, looking down at the city she now commanded, she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this was only the beginning. She had built her throne. Soon, it would be time to hold court. 5 years is a lifetime. In the fast-moving world of technology and finance, it is an eternity. In that time, Phoenix Analytics had evolved from a disruptive startup into a global powerhouse. Its name was spoken with the same reverence as the oldest institutions on Wall Street. Its Oracle platform had become the central nervous system for the global financial market, an indispensable tool for anyone managing serious money. The company was an empire of glass and code, and at its silent, unseen center sat Amelia Hayes. She was a ghost, a billionaire known only by a single initial and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Her wealth was a fortress, her anonymity a weapon. She had everything she had ever wanted, except for the one thing she had been patiently, methodically planning for since the day she left New York: closure. In those same 5 years, Marcus Thorne's life had not exploded. It had slowly, almost imperceptibly, deflated. The grand future he had planned with Chloe, funded by the anticipated seizure of the Hayes Trust, never materialized. Without Amelia's capital, he was just another ambitious man in a city full of them. He had climbed the corporate ladder at Sterling Wentworth, a respectable, old-money financial conglomerate, eventually landing a comfortable position as a senior vice president. It was a life of luxury, of country clubs and corner offices, but it fell far short of the dynastic power he had envisioned for himself. He was a prince in a regional court, not the king of the world he was born to be. The frustration had curdled him, making him more arrogant, more dismissive. He and Chloe were still together, their relationship now a bitter partnership held together by shared disappointments and a mutual, simmering resentment for the woman who had, in their view, inexplicably ruined their plans. To Marcus, Amelia wasn't a success story. He never checked, never cared. In his mind, she was a fragile, emotional creature who had run away and was likely living a quiet, diminished life somewhere in obscurity, a cautionary tale he sometimes told himself to feel better about his own choices. One crisp autumn afternoon, in a silent, top-floor boardroom in Austin, Amelia presided over the quarterly acquisitions meeting. Her executive team, a collection of the sharpest minds in the industry, presented their latest target. It was a company called Argent Data Solutions, a small, technologically obsolete subsidiary of the Sterling Wentworth conglomerate. Argent was failing, a relic of a bygone era, hemorrhaging money and dragging down its parent company's stock value. On the surface, the acquisition was a logical, almost boring, business decision. Phoenix could absorb Argent's long-standing client list, gut its ancient infrastructure, and migrate the clients to the Oracle platform. It was a clean, strategic move that would increase their market share and eliminate a minor competitor. The presentation was flawless, filled with synergy analyses and projected revenue growth. No one in the room knew that for the past 6 months, Amelia's private corporate intelligence team had been mapping every facet of Sterling Wentworth, from its financial vulnerabilities to the personal debts of its board members. No one knew that Argent Data Solutions was not the target. It was the beachhead. It was the Trojan horse. Amelia listened to the entire presentation without saying a word, her face a perfect, unreadable mask. Her team saw their brilliant CEO contemplating a sound financial strategy. They did not see a general reviewing the final details of an invasion plan. When they finished, she paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Then, she gave a single, sharp nod. "Proceed," she said. "Make them a generous offer. I want this to be a fast and simple transaction." Later that evening, alone in her vast office, the city of Austin, a glittering carpet of lights below her, Amelia did something she hadn't done in years. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. On her screen was the complete organizational chart of Sterling Wentworth. Her eyes scanned the complex web of names and titles until they found the one they were looking for. There it was, in a neat little box connected to several failing divisions, including Argent Data Solutions, Marcus Thorne, Senior Vice President, Divisional Oversight. A slow, cold smile, devoid of all warmth and humor, touched her lips. It was the smile of a chess master seeing the entire board, watching her opponent move his pawn exactly where she had predicted, setting up a checkmate that was still 20 moves away. She had not forgotten. She had not forgiven. She had simply been building a better weapon. The formal letter of intent from Phoenix Analytics arrived at the Sterling Wentworth headquarters in New York the next day. It was an impersonal document, delivered by a team of investment bankers, speaking only the cold language of finance. Amelia's name was nowhere on it. The offer for the failing Argent Data Solutions was significantly above market value, a cash deal that was too good to refuse. The news was received by the Sterling Wentworth board not as a threat, but as a miracle. They were ecstatic. They saw Phoenix Analytics as some kind of new money cowboy from Texas, flush with cash and eager to overpay for assets. They laughed at their good fortune, thrilled to offload their biggest corporate headache for a massive profit. They envisioned a simple, clean transaction that would bolster their next quarterly report. In a unanimous vote, they approved the sale. Their final order of business was to assign an executive to manage the transition, to be the primary point of contact with the buyers, and to ensure a smooth integration of the two companies. The choice was obvious. The man who had been overseeing the failing division, the man who knew its inner workings better than anyone, was the natural fit for the job. And so, with a round of self-congratulatory applause, the board of Sterling Wentworth officially appointed Marcus Thorne to personally handle the acquisition by Phoenix Analytics. They had just handed the keys to their kingdom to the one man who was guaranteed not to see the invading army until it was already inside the gates. The trap, 5 years in the making, had finally been sprung. The acquisition of Argent Data Solutions by Phoenix Analytics began not with a bang, but with a sterile, professionally courteous email. From that moment on, the entire transaction was orchestrated with the impersonal precision of a military campaign. Amelia vanished completely, becoming a ghost in her own machine. The face and voice of Phoenix Analytics was her second in command, a ruthlessly intelligent vice president of mergers and acquisitions named David Chen. David was a man forged in the crucible of international finance, fiercely loyal to Amelia, and a master of corporate warfare. He spoke in calm, measured tones that could strip the paint off a wall, and his unblinking gaze could make seasoned executives feel like unprepared schoolboys. To Marcus Thorne and the entire team at Sterling Wentworth, David Chen was Phoenix Analytics. The mysterious CEO, A. Hayes, was mentioned only in legal documents, a reclusive, faceless chairwoman who, they assumed, was too important to be bothered with the details. From his perch at Sterling Wentworth, Marcus viewed the entire process with unconcealed disdain. This was a nuisance, a janitorial task to clean up a failing division and a distraction from the real work of managing his portfolio. He saw Phoenix Analytics not as a titan, but as an upstart, a bunch of tech cowboys from Austin who got lucky with one piece of software. In his first internal meeting on the matter, he was dismissive and arrogant. "Listen," he told his team, "these are new money tech guys. They're aggressive, and they think they're smarter than everyone else because they can code. Our job is to manage them, give them the data they need, but protect the integrity of Sterling Wentworth. Let's show them how business is done in the real world." The first video conference between the two teams set the tone for the entire negotiation. Marcus, attempting to establish dominance, was charmingly condescending. He spoke of Sterling, Wentworth's long and storied history, subtly contrasting it with Phoenix's brief existence. David Chen listened patiently, his face a polite, neutral mask. When Marcus had finished his posturing, David calmly, methodically, began to walk through the 40-point due diligence checklist his team had prepared. He was unflappable, his questions precise and penetrating. Marcus's attempts to deflect or generalize were met with polite but firm requests for specific data points. The call ended with Marcus feeling a strange sense of frustration, as if he'd been wrestling with a cloud of smoke. He had been in control of nothing. What Marcus perceived as a standard, if annoying, due diligence process was, in fact, Amelia's primary intelligence gathering operation. The endless requests for data, for personnel files, for project histories and budget reports, all flowed from Marcus's office to David Chen's team, and from there, directly to a secure server that only Amelia could access. Every night, long after her own empire was asleep, Amelia would sit in her silent office, the glow of the monitor illuminating her face, and she would read. She read the story of Marcus's professional life for the past 5 years. She saw the projects he'd championed that had failed, the budget overruns he had blamed on subordinates, the personnel reviews that revealed his style of management through fear and intimidation. She saw the man stripped bare of his charm and charisma, reduced to a collection of data points that painted a portrait of mediocrity and unearned confidence. He was no longer the monster who had broken her heart. He was simply a flawed asset, a case study in mismanagement, and she was preparing his final performance review. The hubris of Marcus Thorne was a force of nature. One evening, over dinner with Chloe, he swirled a glass of obscenely expensive whiskey and complained. "I cannot wait for this Phoenix deal to be over," he grumbled. Their lead negotiator, this Chen character, is like talking to a brick wall. No sense of the art of the deal. It's all just data and process with these people. Chloe, filing her nails, offered a placating murmur. "But," Marcus continued, a smug smile spreading across his face, "the final handover is in 2 weeks. They're flying their whole executive team in, including the mysterious CEO, the Great A. Hayes is finally descending from her mountaintop. It will be my chance to finally get in a room with their leadership and show them what real corporate power looks like. They have no idea who they're dealing with." The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. While Marcus was boasting, Amelia was prepping her general for the final battle. In a secure video call with David, she was the one playing the role of Marcus. "Tomorrow," she instructed, "he will try to renegotiate the severance packages for the Argent executives. He wants to look like a hero to his board. He will be emotional. He will speak of loyalty. You will let him have that point. Concede gracefully. Then, an hour later, you will send over the final IT integration budget, which will be 30% higher than he expects. He will be so pleased with his small victory that he won't have the energy to fight the bigger one. He is predictable. Use his ego against him." And so it went. The weeks leading up to the final meeting were a meticulously choreographed dance, with Marcus believing he was leading while Amelia composed the music and called every step. Finally, the last contract was signed, the last wire transfer completed. The deal was done. All that remained was the formality, a final in-person summit at the Sterling Wentworth headquarters in New York. A courier delivered a formal invitation to Marcus's office. It detailed the agenda for the full-day integration strategy meeting. He was listed as the primary presenter. At the bottom was the list of attendees from Phoenix Analytics, the chief financial officer, the chief technology officer, the general counsel, David Chen, and, at the very end of the list, a name without a photo. A. Hayes, Chief Executive Officer. Marcus looked at the paper, a feeling of weary triumph washing over him. It was almost over. He was curious. He admitted to himself, to finally meet this reclusive woman who had built such a powerful company. He imagined a stern, awkward, tech nerd, someone he could easily charm and impress. He stood up and walked to the window of his corner office, looking down at the city below. He straightened his tie in the reflection, practicing the confident, welcoming smile he would use to greet his guests. He was a man preparing for a victory lap, completely, blissfully unaware that he was polishing his shoes for his own funeral. The main boardroom of Sterling Wentworth was a cathedral of old money. The walls were paneled with dark, century-old mahogany, adorned with oil paintings of the firm's stern-faced founders. A colossal table, polished to a mirror shine, dominated the space, its sheer size designed to intimidate and impress. This room was Marcus Thorne's natural habitat. It was the heart of his power, a tangible symbol of his heritage and his success. On the morning of the final handover, he stood at the head of that table, exuding an air of magnanimous control. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored Savile Row suit, his presentation notes neatly arranged before him. He joked quietly with his junior executives, his laughter echoing slightly in the vast room. He was the lord of the manor, preparing to welcome guests into his home. He felt a pleasant thrum of anticipation, eager to finally meet the reclusive A. Hayes, and demonstrate the effortless superiority of his world. At precisely 9 o'clock, the heavy doors swung open. The executive team from Phoenix Analytics filed in. They were a stark contrast to the Sterling Wentworth staff. They were younger, leaner, dressed in sharp, modern European suits of charcoal and navy blue. They moved with a silent, unified purpose, their faces professional and unreadable. There was no friendly chatter, no casual pleasantries. They took their designated seats, opened their sleek tablets in unison, and waited. The quiet intensity they brought with them instantly shifted the room's atmosphere. The air grew heavy, charged. Marcus's easy confidence faltered for a fraction of a second. He felt a strange, fleeting sense of being the less powerful party in his own boardroom. Then, after a pause that felt a lifetime long, the door opened one last time. Every head in the room turned. A woman walked in. For a single, surreal moment, Marcus's brain refused to process the image before him. He saw a passing, ghostly resemblance to someone he once knew, a phantom from a forgotten life. He almost dismissed it as a trick of the light, but she kept walking toward the single empty chair at the opposite head of the table, and with each step she took, the impossible became undeniable. The soft, deferential woman who had organized his dinner parties and tolerated his mother's criticisms was gone. This woman was an entirely different species. She wore a severe, impeccably tailored black suit that was the epitome of power dressing. Her hair, which she used to wear soft and long, was cut into a sharp, sophisticated style that framed a face that was both familiar and terrifyingly new. The warmth and gentle uncertainty were gone, replaced by a formidable poise. Her expression was utterly neutral, her eyes holding a chilling, diamond-hard clarity. She moved not with the hesitant grace he remembered, but with the deliberate, confident stride of a conqueror. She radiated an aura of absolute, non-negotiable authority. The confident smile froze on Marcus's face, then slowly melted away, leaving behind a slack-jawed mask of confusion. The presentation notes in his hand suddenly felt slick with sweat. He could hear the blood pounding in his ears, drowning out the low hum of the room. This couldn't be. It was a hallucination, a cruel, elaborate joke. She reached the head of the table. David Chen, who had stood respectfully upon her entrance, spoke into the ringing silence. "Mr. Thorne, members of the board," he said, his voice as crisp as snapping ice. "Allow me to introduce our Chief Executive Officer, Miss Amelia Hayes." Hayes. The name hit Marcus with the force of a physical impact. It was the final, brutal confirmation. A. Hayes. Amelia Hayes. The reclusive genius, the Oracle of Austin. The faceless titan who had terrified Wall Street was Amelia. His Amelia. The wife he had cheated on, mocked, and discarded as a foolish, sentimental woman. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly pale. A tremor started in his right hand, causing the papers he held to rustle with a sound that seemed deafeningly loud in the silent room. The grand boardroom, his sanctuary of power, suddenly felt like a cage, its walls closing in on him. He felt a wave of vertigo so profound he had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling. His past and his present had just collided in a catastrophic explosion, and he was at ground zero. Amelia did not acknowledge his shock. She did not gloat. She did not offer a flicker of recognition or a hint of shared history. Her power was absolute because it required no performance. Her very presence in that chair was his complete and total undoing. She took her seat, placed her hands calmly on the table before her, and for the first time, she looked at him directly. Her eyes were not filled with hate or anger or pain. They were worse. They were empty of any emotion for him at all. It was the look a scientist gives a specimen under a microscope. She let the silence stretch, letting him drown in the full, horrific weight of the new reality. After an eternity, she spoke. Her voice was the one he remembered, yet it was completely different, cool, professional, and utterly devoid of the warmth it once held for him. It was the voice of a superior addressing a subordinate. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," she said. "I see you've met my team." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "Please, begin your presentation whenever you are ready." That single, polite command, "Please begin your presentation," was the most violent act Amelia had ever committed. It shattered the world Marcus Thorne had built for himself, and he was forced to spend the next hour picking through the shards while the architects of his ruin watched him bleed. He began. His voice, usually a confident baritone that commanded rooms, was a thin, reedy thing. He fumbled with his notes, his hands trembling so badly that the words on the page seemed to vibrate. He spoke about synergy, about leveraging assets, about a future of integrated growth, but the words were hollow, meaningless platitudes. He was a ghost haunting his own body, reciting a script from a life that had ended 10 minutes earlier. He dared not look at her, but he could feel her gaze, a cool, heavy weight that pinned him to the spot. The presentation, which he had practiced to perfection, was a catastrophe. He stumbled over figures, contradicted his own slides, and lost his train of thought. His own team, sitting pale and silent, refused to meet his desperate eyes. It was a slow, agonizing, public dissection of a man who was already dead. When he finally, mercifully, finished, a profound silence filled the room. Amelia let it hang in the air for a long moment before she spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she said, her tone utterly neutral. That was illuminating. She did not fire him. That would have been a mercy, a quick, clean end to his suffering. Amelia was not in the business of mercy. In the interest of a seamless and efficient integration, she continued, addressing the room but looking only at him, "My team will begin a comprehensive forensic audit of all divisions under your previous oversight, effective immediately. We require your full and transparent cooperation." It was a perfectly reasonable corporate request. It was also a declaration of total war. Marcus felt the floor drop out from under him. An audit, run by her people, would be an autopsy of his career, and he knew they would find every weakness, every failure, every shortcut he had ever taken. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in psychological torture, all conducted under the pristine, unimpeachable banner of corporate procedure. Amelia didn't need to raise her voice or issue threats. She used the system itself as her weapon. The audit report was a multi-volume masterpiece of his professional failures. Amelia scheduled a series of integration strategy reviews, mandatory for both Phoenix and Sterling Wentworth leadership. In these meetings, which took place in the very boardroom where he had been unmasked, Amelia would project a page from the audit report onto the main screen. "Mr. Thorne," she would say, her voice echoing in the tense silence, "can you please walk the team through the Q3 budget shortfall on the Apex project? The report indicates a 40% cost overrun that was not flagged to the board until the project was unsalvageable. What was your mitigation strategy?" Marcus, standing before his peers and his former subordinates, was forced to narrate his own incompetence. He had to explain, in excruciating detail, his bad decisions, his lack of foresight, his failures of leadership. David Chen and Ben Carter would interject with sharp, technical questions he couldn't answer, further highlighting the chasm between his title and his actual ability. Once his professional incompetence was a matter of public record, Amelia made her next move. A company-wide memo announced a strategic restructuring of the newly integrated divisions. Marcus Thorne's title of Senior Vice President was eliminated. He was not fired, he was reassigned. His new title was Special Projects Coordinator, a meaningless, powerless designation. His sprawling corner office, with its panoramic view of the city, was given to a rising star from the Phoenix team. Marcus was moved to a small, windowless office on a lower floor, a corporate oubliette, where failed executives were sent to fade into irrelevance. His first and only special project was to compile and cross-reference all the data from the audit into a final report, a task a junior analyst could do. He was being forced to author the official history of his own downfall. The final piece of his world was Chloe. Amelia never acknowledged her existence, but she didn't have to. An anonymous, encrypted email was sent to the Sterling Wentworth Human Resources Department, flagging a potential conflict of interest and misuse of corporate travel and expense funds between Marcus Thorne and a senior marketing director, Chloe Jennings. The email included scanned copies of several hotel and restaurant receipts from 5 years prior, receipts Amelia had copied from his briefcase all those years ago. An official and deeply unpleasant HR investigation was launched. The relationship between Marcus and Chloe, already strained by the collapse of his power, shattered under the formal scrutiny. There were bitter, whispered arguments in the hallways. She accused him of being reckless, of bringing this humiliation upon them. He accused her of being the source of his ruin. Their partnership, built on the thrill of a shared, ambitious ascent, could not survive the slow, grinding reality of a shared failure. 2 weeks later, Chloe was quietly dismissed for violating the company's code of conduct. That was the day Marcus finally broke. He stormed past the executive assistants and burst into Amelia's office, the office that had once belonged to the CEO of Sterling Wentworth, his father's old friend. Amelia was on a video call, and she simply held up a single finger, forcing him to wait. A final, casual assertion of her dominance. When she finished, she looked up at him, her expression one of mild annoyance at an interruption. "Yes, Mr. Thorne? Do you have an appointment? Why are you doing this, Amelia?" He choked out, the words raw with a pain and fury he could no longer contain. "Why this? This slow execution?" Amelia leaned back in her chair, her gaze unwavering and cold. "Doing what, Mr. Thorne? I am optimizing a poorly performing asset my company acquired. I am streamlining operations and removing redundancies. It's just business." "Business?" He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You've destroyed me. You took my job, my reputation. You got Chloe fired." For the first time, a flicker of something that was not indifference appeared in her eyes. It was not anger, it was something far colder. "I have done nothing to you that you did not first try to do to me," she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal calm. "That night at the gala, you and she stood in a dark room, and you laughed. You laughed about how you were going to have me sign away my father's legacy, the Hayes Trust, to fund your future. You didn't just have an affair, Marcus. You planned a corporate raid on my entire life. You saw me as a fool, a line item to be liquidated." She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city he once thought he owned. "This isn't revenge," she said, her back to him. "Revenge is emotional. This is a market correction. You were an overvalued asset, and you've been adjusted to your true worth." He stood there, speechless, the last of his defenses obliterated by a truth he had long forgotten. She had heard them. She had known everything, all along. She turned back to face him, her eyes holding the finality of a judge's sentence. "You engineered a hostile takeover of my life. This," she said, gesturing vaguely to the office, to the company, to his ruined career, "is simply the leveraged buyout of yours. Your services are no longer required. Security will escort you out." After being escorted out of the building he once considered his birthright, Marcus Thorne became a ghost. He wandered the concrete canyons of Manhattan, a man stripped of his title, his power, and his future. The city he had once commanded now seemed alien and hostile. In the depths of his despair, with his world reduced to ashes, he did what he had always done when faced with a problem he couldn't solve. He went to his mother. He expected to find an ally, a furious matriarch, ready to unleash her formidable social and legal arsenal against the woman who had dared to attack her son. He burst into Eleanor Thorne's lavish Fifth Avenue apartment, a broken, ranting man, laying out the entire, insane story of Amelia's return and his spectacular downfall. But the reaction he received was not the one he expected. There was no outrage. There was no fury. There was only a quiet, weary resignation. Eleanor sat in her armchair, looking older and more fragile than he had ever seen her, her face a mask of cold, grim finality. "She came to see me last week, Marcus," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. The statement hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She explained that Amelia had not called or sent a lawyer. She had simply arrived, unannounced, looking as poised and immovable as a marble statue. She had been polite, she had been respectful, and she had been utterly terrifying. Amelia had not spoken of heartbreak or betrayal. She had spoken of accounting discrepancies. She calmly presented Eleanor with a slim, leather-bound file. Inside, meticulously documented, was irrefutable proof that for over a decade, Eleanor had been embezzling funds from the Thorne family's primary charitable foundation, diverting millions into a series of private and traceable accounts. It was a secret Eleanor thought was buried forever, a quiet crime she committed to maintain a lifestyle even her vast wealth couldn't fully support. Amelia had found it. After presenting the first file, Amelia had placed a second, identical file on the polished table between them. This one, Amelia had explained, is a confession, not yours, your son's. It was a document admitting to gross financial mismanagement, professional negligence, and the deliberate concealment of losses at Argent Data Solutions, all things the audit had, in fact, proven to be true. It was a corporate scapegoat's last will and testament, a document that would legally shield the company and its new ownership from any future shareholder lawsuits, placing the full weight of the division's failure squarely on Marcus. "She gave me a choice," Eleanor whispered, her eyes avoiding Marcus's horrified gaze. "It was a simple business decision," she said. "I could give her your signature on the confession, in which case the evidence of my activities would be permanently sealed, or I could refuse, and she would forward her findings to the Internal Revenue Service and the District Attorney's Office." Eleanor finally looked up at her son, and in her eyes he saw not a mother, but a pragmatist, a survivor. It was the same cold, calculating look he had seen in Amelia's eyes. He realized, in that horrifying moment, that these two formidable women were more alike than he had ever known, and he had been caught between them. "She knew you would come to me," Eleanor said, her voice cracking with a sliver of self-loathing. "She knew I was your last resort, and she used it." From a drawer in her antique desk, Eleanor pulled out the second file. She slid it across the table toward her only son. The ultimate betrayal was not delivered by his enemy. It was delivered by his creator. The woman who had taught him that the Thorne name was all that mattered was now demanding he sacrifice himself to save it for her. Marcus looked at the papers, then at his mother, and the last of his fight drained out of him. He was no longer a Thorne. He was a liability. He signed the confession. Marcus Thorne simply ceased to exist in the world that mattered. His name became a cautionary whisper on Wall Street, a story of a man who had flown too close to the sun and vanished. Chloe was gone, his friends abandoned him, and his own mother could barely look at him. He was a man erased. And Amelia? In a move that stunned the financial world, 6 months after the acquisition was complete and Sterling Wentworth was fully stabilized under her control, she announced her resignation as CEO of Phoenix Analytics. She sold her majority stake in the company for a sum so vast it was almost theoretical, and then, just as she had done 5 years earlier, she disappeared. She wasn't celebrating. The victory did not taste sweet. It tasted only of peace. The war was over. The debt had been paid. The ghosts of her past had finally been laid to rest. She had not done it for joy, but for a sense of cosmic rebalancing, to correct a ledger that had been violently thrown into chaos. And so we come to the end of our story, and to a simple, chilling truth. Never underestimate the silence of a person who has endured too much. For in that silence, they are not just healing their wounds. They are studying the board. They are identifying their opponent's weaknesses. They are forging their pain into a weapon, sharpening it with patience, and cooling it with resolve. True justice is rarely a loud, fiery explosion of vengeance. More often, it is the quiet, inevitable, and meticulous collapse of a structure that was built on a foundation of lies and betrayal. The guilty are not always struck down by a bolt of lightning. Sometimes, they are simply handed a pen and paper by the people they trusted most and are forced to sign their own ruin. The world is full of secrets, and behind every closed door, a story of love, betrayal, and consequence is waiting to be told. Join us next time as we unlock another. Thank you for listening.